Welcome back everyone. Hi, if you're new, I'm Tori, and today I'm going to take you guys through the books that I read in March. Overall, it was a pretty lukewarm reading month, sadly. I do have one standout that I absolutely loved. I cannot wait to share that with you guys. But, you know, for the most part, everything kind of ranged from, you know, I didn't like it to it was fine to good. But the books that do fall on the good spectrum are a little bit on the lower end. So yeah, definitely a little bit of a mixed bag here. Just send me all of your good reading vibes for April. I feel like the last couple of months now have just been all over the place for me in terms of the things that I'm enjoying. We're into spring now, so new season, new books. I'm hopeful. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. But here is March. I hope you guys enjoy this video. Let's get into it. So the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to start with the book that I did not like, and then they're just going to get, you know, better and better as the video goes on, and we're going to end off on a great note with the book that I loved. But first, let's talk about The Bladed Faith by David Dalglish. This is the book that I did not like. This is the first book in a fantasy series, adult fantasy series that started in 2022. I'm glad that I did read this more in the middle of the month because I was a little conflicted about how I felt about it when I finished it, but now that it has had time to sit with me, I can definitely say now that it wasn't for me. There were several things that I didn't like about this book. I think this book rests a little too much on the, you know, you should just root for the main character because they're the main character kind of vibe, and it just never happened for me. I did not like this main character at all. Things start off pretty horrifically in this book. The Empire invades our main character's island nation. Our main character, he's a prince, and so he watches his mother and father slaughtered. He watches his gods, you know, his gods are killed, and it's not a good time for him or for anybody in this island nation. And so that inciting incident, I think, is supposed to really reel you in as the reader and really emotionally connect you to this main character. But I mean, I can recognize that what happened was terrible, but outside of that, I didn't feel anything for this character. I didn't care. From there, you know, he has to submit to this empire's rule for a while. Then one day he's rescued by this rebellion, and they teach him how to fight, how to really handle himself in battle. So one day he can, you know, just prepare as much as possible, and one day go back and take his rightful place on the throne and also be the leader that his people need during this time. Maybe it's just me, but for some reason I just did not care about this character. I was not really invested in his training. I wasn't really invested in what he was going through. And even just aside from him, all of the side characters, except for two of them, there are two sister POVs that we get in here. I loved both of the sisters, and I actually wish we got more of their perspective throughout the book because they were the best part of the story. But even the other side characters, I just wasn't getting on with them, wasn't really invested in what they were trying to accomplish. And another big thing that really did not work for me in this book is the way that it's told. I mentioned this in my updates video about this book, but I'm going to go into a little more detail here. I think this book feels very tropey. It feels like a story that we have heard so many times before, but The Bladed Faith, I don't think does anything that unique to make this story stand out from all the other ones that we've read before. There are some really amazing fight sequences in here that I do think could make it stand out for some readers, and actually did kind of grip me in the beginning. But overall, I think it just plays it a little bit too safe and relies a little bit too heavily on some common tropes. And some books I think can get away with that, but there have to be other interesting things in the story, in the world, and the characters to kind of pad those typical tropes, and I didn't get that from this book. And then also, I was not a fan of the actual storytelling, the actual prose in this book. It has that kind of style to it where, and this is not an example in the book, but I'm just trying to give you an example, but it has that style that's like, you know, Cyrus wanted to participate, yet he was but a boy, just 3 moons away from his name day. It has like that feeling to it. But then also there's like modern prose and modern dialogue mixed into that, and some like slang phrases that feel a little bit more modern. And just that mix to me just felt very awkward. And sometimes I think the prose itself, the more classic prose or classic feel to the prose, just felt kind of cheesy sometimes. Cyrus has these moments where he makes these really bold like proclamations to himself. He'll be looking out into the distance at his kingdom, and he's like, you know, one day I'm gonna stand up to you, I'm gonna take revenge, and I'm gonna fight really hard. Then I'm like, yes, I get it, but I thought it was a little cheesy sometimes. But overall, just, you know, unfortunately, I wasn't the biggest fan of this. And I am not going to be continuing on with the rest of the series. And then next, let's talk about Infinity Gate by M.R. Carey. This is a recent release. It just came out. And I so desperately, you guys, wanted to love this book. And I really didn't. I thought I was gonna love this. M.R. Carey has written one of my favorite books, The Girl with All the Gifts. And I was just so excited to see this, you know, this big sci-fi, this big epic leap into, you know, into this kind of, these sci-fi concepts. And I just could not care less after a certain point what was going on in the story. I liked the concept. I loved all of the buildup that we got, but there's something in the execution, there's something in the actual movement and flow of the story and the characters that I just did not get on with while reading this book. So in this book, we have several characters who we're following, but one of our main characters, Hadiz, she is a scientist in Nigeria, in Lagos, and she accidentally, you know, figures out that these different Earths exist, and she starts doing these experiments. She starts traveling, sending different objects to these multiple versions of Earth, collecting research. But in doing all of this, she gets on the radar in a bad way of the entity or the empire that controls all of this this transportation between the different Earths and the trade between the different Earths, and they're called the Pandemonium or Pandemonium. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but she gets on their radar, and even the military arm of the Pandemonium is, you know, trying to go after her and figure out like what she knows and how, you know, how did she figure this out and all this kind of stuff. And then from there, other characters get involved. One of our characters does end up being more sucked into the military arm of this empire, and the story unfolds from there, and you start learning that there is a larger threat to the entire empire from worlds that are not, you know, that are basically not in allegiance with them, worlds where there's AI, like rogue AI, rogue machines, things like that. And I will say I loved, you know, especially in the like 40%, just getting all this information about these multiple versions of Earth, because I mean it's a lot. All of these Earths, they're so unique in their own right. They've evolved in different ways, and it was just so fascinating, and I loved like that aspect of the book. And also there's a hard rule when you're traveling between all of these different Earths. You can't like travel, like say you're in, let's just use Lagos as an example. Like say you're in Lagos, you can't then step, is what they call it. You can't step from there to like London. You will step in the same place that you left from in a different Earth. So I love kind of those hard rules that we had in the book, and just again learning more about all of the, just learning how all the different planets are different and learning how the different species on those planets evolved over time. I think I just would have loved a whole book about that maybe, but it just, yeah, it just, as the book went on, it just really was not doing a whole lot for me. I feel like a lot of this book is just, it's a lot of setup. It's a lot of, yeah, it's a lot of setup. And then by the time you get to the end, you know, I'm just like, did I really, I don't know how long it is. I think it's over 500 pages just going on what Goodreads says. But I'm like, did I really just read all of that for it to end this way? And then you have to read book 2. I'm not reading book 2, by the way, but you have to read book 2. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if I enjoyed it was a spectrum, Infinity Gate would be at the very, very low end of that spectrum. It just barely made the I enjoyed it category. I did like it overall, but just, it really was not what I was excited for, what I was hoping it would be overall. I wish I had loved it more, unfortunately. And then next, let's get into Bloodmarked by Tracy Deonn. This is another one where I'm just like, oh, what is going on with these characters that I'm reading this month? What's going on with these stories? Man, I don't know where to start with Bloodmarked. I enjoyed this book overall. I think I would put it a little bit higher than Infinity Gate. Like it would probably be like in the middle of the I enjoyed it spectrum. But again, I have so many issues with this book. I did like it, but I think this book suffers very, very heavily from second book syndrome. There's so much meandering that happens in this book, so much meandering. And then just a lot of the things that we learn about Bree at the end of Legendborn, and the things that we learn about her ancestry, her history, heritage, the way that it makes sense, I get it, but the way that it starts being expanded on in Bloodmarked, and the deeper we go into it, the more convoluted it starts to feel. And then by the end of this book, I would say like the last even 5 pages, I was thinking, what is going on right now? Like, what am I reading? I literally had to go back and reread the last 2 to 3 pages because I'm like, how did we get here? I'm trying to like connect little dots and lines. Like, who is this person? 2 things though, I really loved. There's a side character in here, Bree's best friend. I loved her in this book. She was in book 1, but she was just kind of, you know, she's kind of there just being the supportive best friend. But in this book, I think she definitely got more of a chance to shine, and she really came out. I really, really liked her. And also Bree herself, I think Tracy Deonn did a really excellent job portraying that genuine struggle that she's having mentally, just everything that she's been going through since book 1. I think that is portrayed really, really well, and you're following her on that kind of mental journey throughout this book. And especially as she's getting deeper into the lore of the order, and not the lore, but like the history of the order and things like that, and the way she has to just stand up for herself in these really strong ways. So I love that aspect of the story. I think though, in terms of actual plot movement and being a solid bridge between books 1 and 3, I can't say for sure that this book necessarily did that successfully, but it was still entertaining. So yeah, that's Bloodmarked. I enjoyed it, didn't love it. I am gonna read book 3, but it's like I'm really skeptical about reading book 3. I'll put it like that. Really skeptical. Now let's get into The Bone Shard Daughter by Andrea Stewart. Now we're moving up the I enjoyed it ladder, but I still had some issues with this book too. We'll get into it. But this is the first book in a fantasy series, and I will say, in terms of the story, in terms of the world building, even in terms of the writing, I enjoyed this book. I thought that was all great. In terms of the characters, I got a few issues going on here. I thought these characters were a little bit flat. The synopsis has you thinking that the story is gonna be from Lynn's POV, but there are like 5 POVs in this book, like 4 kind of main ones and then 5 that pops up here and there, but there are 5 POVs that this book is stretched across. And I think of the 5 of them, I enjoyed Lynn's POV. Like, it was fine. Like, I don't think she's one of the strongest characters in this book, but of those 5 POVs, I felt that only one actually was really engaging, had depth. It's Jovis. He is a smuggler, and I really loved him. There's another POV in here, Renami. I did not like her. I didn't like her character. Luckily, we don't get her perspective that often, but when we did, I was like, please get somebody else on the page. And then another character, Renami's partner, Falu, she's of noble standing. She's the governor's daughter. I think her character for me is where things started to fall a little bit flat for me in the story, because when you have a character like that, I think there is some level of introspection that needs to happen when they're surrounded by rebellion, pretty much. I didn't buy a lot of the things that Falu was doing. It felt like they were being used just to further the story, but not because they actually made sense for her character. So that's one reason I just really didn't get on with her. And then as far as Lynn goes, I have no feelings for her right now. No strong feelings, I'll say. Her story is interesting, and what she went through in her POVs was interesting, but there's just something about her in particular that I'm not connecting to as a character, like emotional attachment as a reader, that I don't care about that much. But if you're unfamiliar, in this book, we have an empire that is broken up into all of these different isles. And how do I explain this book? And a long time ago, there was this big threat to all of the isles. And because of that, all the citizens, they now have a bone shard that's carved out from like behind their ear, and the emperor uses them in order to create, in order to fuel constructs, in order to protect the empire and all of the isles. And with the bone shards, you can like write commands on them, you can stack the commands and things like that, and basically get the constructs to do what the person controlling them wants them to do. And they're all like, it's kind of an abomination. It's all like animal parts, like put together in different ways. So like, you know, be aware of that. It was kind of uncomfortable to read, for me at least. So Lynn, she's the daughter of the emperor, but she is in a position where she has had her, you know, she doesn't have a lot of her memories. So throughout the book, she's trying to piece together who she is, and she's also trying to get her, you know, not only get her father's approval, but also become someone who can be really good at creating these constructs. And I'll leave it at that. And that's another thing about it. Even though the world itself is really interesting and I was really, really invested in that aspect of the story, there are a lot of scenes in here where I was thinking, what am I supposed to be picturing right now? I was just like, I think my imagination is broken. I don't know what is going on in this scene. So there were a lot of moments like that. I will be reading book 2, but I'm really, really hoping that book 2 comes out of the gate swinging, because if not, I probably won't be reading book 3. And then last but not least, let's talk about the star of the month, which was The Ruin of Kings by Jen Lyons. This was incredible. This was the star. This was the star so far, even of the year. I loved this book. I loved this reading experience. This is probably one of the most challenging reading experiences I've had in a while. Jen Lyons, she put my brain to work. There's a line in here that quite literally says, it says something along the lines of, you know, use that brain of yours. I know it's hard, but just try. And that just encapsulates this entire reading experience. My mind, I'm not kidding, was spinning by the time I finished this book. It's so dense. It is just, in terms of details coming at you, it is actually very unforgiving and kind of overwhelming. So, I mean, this book was a lot. There was one point during this book, especially when like revelations started coming out about who was related to who and names that had been changed and people who are now these people, I was almost getting so flustered and so overwhelmed by all this information coming at me that at one point I literally said to myself, well, what are two people called who share the same parents? That is when I knew I had to put this book down and go to bed. I wasn't thinking straight. I could not process anything after a certain point. This was incredible. The structure of it was just so good. I'm telling you, if you are up for an awesome story that will put you to work, and you know, maybe this is not going to be the case for everybody. There are probably some people out there who like, it wasn't that confusing for me. Well, good for you. It was confusing for me. So if you are up for a challenge, I highly recommend The Ruin of Kings. This is a story that has just, the structure of it is so layered. The timelines of it are just kind of all over the place. There are multiple people telling this story, and it is just, it all comes together in a way that just feels so rewarding. Like, you put in all this effort and by the time you close the book, you're like, that paid off. So what is this book about? So we are following our main character, Kieran, and Kieran, he is telling the story. This is multiple timelines happening. Kieran is telling the story in his own words in one timeline, and then we have another character, Talon, who is also telling Kieran's story a little bit in the past from where Kieran starts his story. And then there's also another character who is going through this story with us, but who is also including footnotes. So just anything, you know, related to gods and goddesses and world building and characters, like what have you, there's always some kind of footnote at the bottom that's like offering more information or offering a correction, or just, you know, when this person actually appears in the story, he is like, you know, talking about himself in some footnotes. This was excellent. I don't even know how to keep gushing about it because I'll probably just confuse myself the more I keep talking about it. But I'm telling you, it does, everything falls into place and it does make sense. But Jen Lyons, she just has this storytelling style in this book where she is quite literally forcing you to keep up with her. I actually think this is a book that needs to be read twice. I'm not gonna do it, but it needs to be read twice in order to, you know, if you really want to piece together the story from what you know now. It's just, this was excellent. So if you are interested in The Ruin of Kings, I highly, highly recommend this book. Is it gonna be for everybody? Absolutely not, but it worked for me and I thought it was incredible. So that is it for me, you guys. Thank you all so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. Let me know down in the comments how March went for you and what are your plans for April. I wanna hear about it. And I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.